Hello and welcome to our Friday webinar. And thank you for joining us for a little bit, our early start hour has begun with Dr. Stephanie Lamb. Welcome, Dr. Lamb.
Hello.
Hi. So I think, well, let's give people a little bit of time to log on. Especially the ones who are like, wait, it's 11, that's well today.
Right, exactly. For the next few months. Thank you for being able to meet me early. I know the time change is always a little confusing since Arizona doesn't change time.
Well, no, for us, it helps us get our weekend started early. No, it's awesome. It's just great that you even give so much of your time to these webinars. So yeah, we're the appreciative ones here. Hey, so just real quick, you rolled back, got back from Costa Rica. How long was that? Like a couple weeks ago?
About 2 weeks ago. So
all right.
It was great. I had a good time. I hope all the people who viewed the webinar at the time enjoyed it, and if you haven't seen it, if people haven't watched it, they can go back and watch it.
All right, so you planning your next trip back there soon?
You know, I am thinking about it in my head, but nothing official.
Oh man, all right. So I guess today we are gonna get we're gonna get back in, we're rolling into the holiday season here. So what better topic to cover than holiday hazards that we all should be looking out for with our flocks. So I'm imagining, do you have a presentation for us?
I do. Yep, I have a presentation, a PowerPoint for you guys, and if you feel like we've let enough time for people to come in, I can start, or if you want to give a little bit more time, it's up to you.
Yeah, maybe let's see here. Oh, we got Arroyo. Arroyo's just chilling back there, like
he's hanging out. I gave him some new toys, and he's usually afraid of his toys the first day that he gets them. He's actually chewing on one right now, because that is the first time I've seen him touch that thing.
Now when you left, how did he feel when he came back? Was he like, where were you?
Yeah, he was happy to see me. My husband stayed behind, so he wasn't alone. He was well cared for. But yeah, he was happy to see me. And then when I got back, it was nice. I had a couple of extra days before starting work back up. So me and him and the other birds, we hung out and relaxed.
Okay. Now, were there any foods over there in Costa Rica that you're like, Royal might like that?
Yeah, so it was interesting because the two main things that the macaws are eating, like that they've seen them eating out by the facility, the wild ones, is beach almond, a tree called beach almond, and it grows on the beaches, hence the name. And then another thing called Nance, which was not in the season, so I didn't get to really see what that was. But then I did show the picture of the third thing, which was teak, which it was a weird, interesting looking little pod. It had this flaky outer sort of husk almost, and then inside of it was this weird dense fruit. I didn't try it myself. I don't know what it tasted like, but it looked almost too fibrous to me. But that's what the birds are eating, and it did make me wonder. I wonder, if they would want to eat it. But you can't bring anything back, right? Because you're not supposed to cross borders with any sort of fauna or flora.
That's right. It's important.
So no bringing back any Costa Rican delicacies for Arroyo.
He's like, oh no, he didn't get any souvenirs, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Oh man. All right. So I guess we'll get this holiday hazard party started, so to speak. And just a reminder, if you have questions, we'll save them for the end and use the Q&A feature. And with that said, I'll hand it over to you, Dr. Lamb.
All right. Well, let me share my screen here, and we'll get started.
I see Arroyo already on his way. He's doing something. Oh no, he's there.
All right, so we're going to talk about holiday hazards, because even though the holidays are this fun time that we all enjoy, the reality is there are things that could potentially be dangerous during this time of year that we need to know about, because knowledge is power. And if we don't know about these things, then we're more likely to have these sort of problems arise, versus if we are made aware of them, then we can avoid them and we can have a happy holiday season, and we don't have to have any sort of problems where we end up at the vet when we don't want to be. We want to be with our families, celebrating with our families, or having some, tragic thing happens that then makes people upset every time this time of year comes around. So, hopefully by the end of this, people will have a little bit better idea of things to be aware of so that they're not running into any problems. So, all right, so the very, very first thing I wanted to talk about that I think a lot of pet owners know about, or know to be aware of, but sometimes may forget, is the hazards associated with cooking, especially since our first holiday that's coming up here real soon, in the next couple of weeks, is Thanksgiving. Lots of people are going to be doing lots of cooking, and with cooking, there is unfortunately lots of hazardous things in the kitchen that birds should really, really, really not be around or exposed to. The first thing I want to talk about is Teflon toxicity. So off in the right-hand corner of our screen here, you can see this Teflon pan. Teflon pans are nice for humans because they are non-stick. And hey, when we're spending a lot of time in the kitchen in the holidays and we're cooking, it's nice to be able to have stuff that's easy to clean. So that's what's great about Teflon from the human standpoint. But from the bird standpoint, Teflon is not so great. And why is it that Teflon is a problem? Because we may know that, okay, I can't really cook with Teflon around my birds, but we may not know why. And the reason is because there is a particle that's actually released from the pan when the pan gets to a very, very high heat. And so it has to get to heats that are quite high, like in the 500-degree range. But if you're cooking on stovetop, or you have one of these pans maybe in the oven on a really high heat, you could get it to those levels. If you're boiling water in a pot that's Teflon, it's less likely to be a problem because they're often not able to get to as high of levels of where the actual chemical compound is released. It has a very long name, but just short named is PTFE. So that compound, when it reaches high heat levels, gets released and it gets aerosolized, and it doesn't have any smell to it. It's an odorless thing. But what it does is when it gets inhaled in birds, it actually causes bleeding in the lungs. And so it's really quite awful because a bird will seem to be totally fine, and then all of a sudden it's having respiratory distress. It's gasping to breathe. So it's a very sudden change. And owners will rush a bird into the hospital. And unfortunately, sometimes the bird's not even able to make it out of the house. Sometimes they're not even able to make it to the hospital because they can die from bleeding in their lungs. If they make it to the hospital, what we will do in the hospital is we get them into an oxygen cage so that they can be breathing a higher concentration of oxygen. So any portion of the lung that has not been damaged by this particle can be functional as best as it possibly can. We put them on anti-inflammatories because you can imagine when you have this particle that causes so much damage to the lungs, it essentially like cuts the lungs up to where there's bleeding happening. There's a lot of inflammation that could potentially happen, so we may put them on anti-inflammatories. We may also be putting them on antibiotics because if you're bleeding in your lungs, you're setting up an environment for secondary infections, bacterial or fungal infections. So we may be doing antibiotics or antifungals depending upon the species. And then also sometimes they just need some general supportive care. They may end up not feeling great because again, this is something that can be rapidly deadly. So you can imagine if you are bleeding from your lungs, you're probably not feeling so great if you are able to survive to the point to get to the hospital and to be able to get into an oxygen chamber. So you may end up, a bird may end up not be wanting to eat or drink appropriately. So they may need to be staying in the hospital on fluids and assist feedings. And then hopefully with getting them out of that environment where the toxin was and getting them supportive care, hopefully they can recover and go home. Sadly, many do not. sadly, a lot of birds, again, either die at the house very rapidly, or they die in the car ride, or maybe they get to the office, but the damage that's done is too severe and they die soon after getting into the hospital. I have had a few that have successfully survived. My presumption is that those individuals did not get an inhalation of as much of the particulate stuff, that the gas that's released from these pans as those that pass away. But it's really devastating. And the other thing that has this same Teflon compound is ovens. The self-cleaning function of the oven, not when you just turn an oven on like normal. It is when you use the self-cleaning function of the oven that gas is released. Again, it doesn't cause any problems for us, but it absolutely can be deadly for birds. And sadly, I remember one Thanksgiving actually when I was an intern where I got called in because it was Thanksgiving Day, and the hospital was closed, but we were taking emergencies. And so I got called in for an emergency for a bird where the owner of the bird had turned the self-cleaning function of the oven on after cooking pies and everything. And the bird came into the hospital, and sadly it passed on the car ride over. So it didn't even make it into the office. And that's sad, because Thanksgiving is supposed to be this time where we're grateful for our family and friends and all the wonderful things that we have. And sadly, these people lost a dear friend that day, and so it just makes me feel bad for the next Thanksgiving. How are they going to remember Thanksgivings from then on? So we don't want that to happen. So no Teflon around birds, no self-cleaning function oven, when our use of that on the oven when birds are around. If you need to use these things, these birds should be out of the room for sure, if not even just out of the house. I mean, just be really safe, because we may think sometimes that if they're really far away, it's safe. And yes, theoretically, the further away they are in the house, it should be safe. But how is the air circulating through our air ducts and vents and AC units and things like that throughout the house? Could potentially stuff get to a portion of the house that we don't necessarily know, like how the connection is with airflow. So best to just not use these things when a bird's in the house. Now, a couple of other things to mention about cooking, because it's not just Teflon that's the problem in the kitchen. The other problem is the high heat, just in general. So in the center picture here, I have a pot of boiling water. That pot is in a metal pot. That pot is not a problem as far as Teflon goes. It's not releasing any sort of toxin, but it is a pot of boiling water, so it's really hot. And you do not want to have your bird hanging out with you in the kitchen while you are cooking, because we're humans, we can be clumsy, even though we may try to not ever spill any water or anything. It happens, sometimes when you're transferring that pot from the stove top over to like the sink, you could potentially spill a little water. And what if your bird's right there? You could potentially have the bird get burned or injured, or if it touches the side of the pot, that it could potentially be burned. Or the flame, if you have an active flame that is on, obviously, you don't want your bird close to that flame. What if the bird gets close to it? And what if the bird turns around and its tail gets singed or something like that? You have to be super careful. And then, back to the oven, when you're opening that oven, make sure the bird is not in the kitchen, because, birds are curious and they may go, "Ooh, what's that neat little cavity that's in there? I want to see what's in there." Remember that our parrots are often cavity nesters. So they're really interested by little holes and areas, and they want to inspect things. So an oven looks like a great little cavity. You can see this picture here, where these different compartments, if you were a parrot, you probably would want to investigate that. If it's hot and something's coming out, the last thing you want is your bird, especially if it's flighted, flying over and doing anything that it shouldn't. Now, I say these things and people may say, well, that would never happen. But I am speaking from experience. And the next picture I'm going to show something that unfortunately happened with one bird. And it's a little bit of a graphic picture, so just a fair warning. But it's important, I think, to discuss, to really show that these sort of problems happen. So here's a picture of a cockatiel, and we have this cockatiel sitting on the side of a pan. Now this picture was taken as just like a demonstration of what not to do. So there is no flame that is on. This is a just room temperature, cool pot, doesn't have any water in it. It's totally safe when this picture was taken. But this picture that you can see here is a bird that suffered burns from flying into a pot of boiling water in the kitchen. This picture is actually taken from one of my mentors, Dr. Satinas. He's an individual who helped be a part of me becoming a vet, but he took these pictures. So thank you, Dr. Satinas, for allowing me to show these. They show what happened to this bird when it flew into the pot. These are third-degree burns. I mean, look at the tissue that is damaged from this poor bird, and it's not just one leg. This is your left leg, and this is the right leg. You know, so you know this bird is in extreme pain. This bird is definitely being set up for nasty bacterial infections or yeast infections on the skin. This is going to take several weeks to heal. Toe problems all the way down here sometimes are slow things to heal. These toe lesions could take several weeks to heal. We've got a lot of skin that has sloughed, and this is just right after the event occurred. There could be more tissue damage that happened that has not declared itself, to where this bird could potentially have more problems later. And honestly, this could even be deadly, because this degree of skin loss, now you've exposed the subcutaneous tissue. This is going to make this bird be able to be dehydrated easier, because the skin is not having that nice appropriate protective barrier that keeps an individual hydrated well. So this is absolutely something that you could have this bird come in and we go, oh my gosh, it's going to be okay, we saved the bird, but the bird could crash in a couple of days because of just the shock of everything that happened on its system. So definitely something to be aware of. And again, I know these pictures are graphic, but I think it's important for people to be aware of it, because accidents happen. No way did this owner mean for this to occur, you know, but it did. And so keep your birds out of the kitchen when you're cooking, please. Okay. Other things. So obviously we're talking about cooking, but that also means we got to talk about just food in general. Usually during the holiday season, we are celebrating with food, right? If we're talking about cooking, we're cooking food. There's lots of things that people are enjoying during the holidays, different sweets and treats, and different types of foods that they may not be eating during other parts of the year. And it's a good time to just be reminded about the fact that we shouldn't be feeding certain things to our birds. So I just have a few pictures up here of things that we need to be cautious of. Now, the first things I want to talk about are the things that portions of it will be okay, and that's going to be these cherries here and these apples up here. Apples, the flesh of apples, the flesh of cherries, totally fine. Your bird can eat that. That's fine. You know, if you're having some of those things around because they're going to be part of baked goods and you're making some really delicious dessert for people, you can give birds portions of the fleshy part of those items, but do not give the birds the inner portions, the seeds of those particular items, or any stone fruits. So if you have peaches, nectarines, you know, those sort of things, or sorry, not nectarines, plums, you know, those sort of things, you do not want to give them those seeds. Yes, they're big, and certainly a macaw could break into them. You might obviously not be able to have a budgie break into the pit of a peach or anything like that, but you have to recognize you cannot give those to birds. People will say, well, it's the seed of something, you know, if they're in the wild, they're going to be eating the seeds of lots of different plants, right? And yes, it is true, they are doing that, but they are eating the seeds of native plants that they have evolved around, that they have been able to eat appropriately. These seeds are not appropriate. We do not want them eating these. These have cyanide in them. And so in little quantities, a single apple seed is not going to kill a bird. But if you let your bird, say you cored that apple and you gave it a whole bunch of cores because we were making like an apple pie or something like that, you could potentially cause problems if you're dealing with a really small bird. So, you know, I will say it is unlikely that we would see a toxicity come up, but it's not impossible. If somebody isn't aware of that part of these fruits being toxic, they could accidentally give too much and cause problems. So just be aware that you don't want to do that part for them. Okay, other things on here, avocados. I don't know how many people are doing avocados during the holiday seasons. I don't think it's a traditional holiday treat or anything like that, but maybe in some parts of the world it is, I don't know, or maybe for some cultures, I'm not sure, but it's just a good time to just be reminded why we don't want birds to be eating avocados, and the reason being the particular toxin that these fruits have, it's called persin, and what it does is it actually can cause heart problems for birds. So when birds eat avocado, it can cause what's called pericardial effusion, where they get fluid that builds up in the sac that surrounds the heart. So you have your heart, and then you have a little sac around it, the pericardium. And there's normally a teeny tiny bit of fluid in that space, but this persin toxin actually will cause damage that results in more fluid development around that heart. And when that fluid develops around the heart, it makes it so the heart muscle that's inside of that sac cannot expand as well as it's supposed to, because now it's got this pressure from all this fluid on it. So you're not having as appropriate of cardiac functioning. And again, a bird can die from this. So, and I sadly have seen birds come into the office that have passed away from avocado toxicity. The good news is they need to eat a lot of it for it to be a problem. But again, what is a lot? When we're talking about a budgie versus a macaw, you know, they could eat the same amount, and obviously for a budgie, it's really quite problematic, where maybe the same amount eaten by a macaw is going to be okay. But the point is, you need to be cautious with it. Don't let your birds have access to it. I put just a picture of a slab of meat. You know, during the holidays, you know, people are cooking a variety of different types of meats and things. Just remember that our birds are granivores, which means they eat grains, or they're frugivores, which means they eat fruits. They're not carnivores unless you have a raptor. So they really should not be getting meats. I mean, if they get a tiny little piece of something, it's not the end of the world typically, but I will say that sometimes when something is added to the diet that they are not used to, it can throw off the normal flora that's in the GI tract that helps keep everything in balance, and then you can have problems. And so that goes the same for all the delicious dairy stuff that I have over here in this corner. You know, birds are lactose intolerant. They do not have the enzyme lactase that breaks down lactose that's in all of our dairy products. And so since they don't have that enzyme, they aren't able to process the sugars the same way that we can, because we are mammals and we have that enzyme. So what happens is it can cause diarrhea in them when these are passing through their GI tract. So again, a little bit is not the end of the world, but if you give your bird a lot of this, it could potentially cause diarrhea and cause problems. So the next couple of pictures that I'm going to show are trying to prove the problems that can happen when birds are eating some of these items that they really shouldn't be. Again, when we're talking about the meats and we're talking about the dairy, they're not toxic. They're like the apple seeds or cherry pits or the avocado. It's just that they are things that the birds don't have the appropriate enzymes to break things down. And because of that, it throws off that gastrointestinal flora and makes them have problems like diarrhea and vomiting. So this picture here is a picture of diarrhea in a bird. So the stool you can see is just kind of smashed out on this paper towel. It's not that nice, normal, tight little tubular structure that typically comes out from a bird. It's more loose appearing. The urates are sort of spread throughout everything. And you'll notice how much water is being produced in this dropping. Normally, there's only a small amount of water that's actually excreted in their droppings. And so this large volume, combined with the changes to the actual fecal component itself, this is a bird that has diarrhea. And this absolutely can happen when we have a bird who has eaten too much dairy or had some sort of dietary change that they just were not used to. And then this budgie over here, you can tell that he doesn't feel well. And the reason you can tell he doesn't feel well is we're going to read his bird body language. And you can see his eye is not fully open. He's kind of squinting a little bit. He's really fluffed up with his body rather than having his head sort of perked up and like looking around. He kind of has his head lower down, sort of a hunched back posture. His wings are droopy. All those things tell me that this little guy is not feeling good just simply by looking at this single still frame photo of him. Now I can tell he's sick as well, because if you notice in the photo, see on his head here how he has all these like little brown specks on his head. Now some of that is just normal pigment of the feathers, but the more brown portion, that's not normal pigment. It's almost making like a spike of the feathers coming together. What that is that's vomit. And little budgies, the smaller guys like the budgies, the cockatiels, the tiny little guys, when they aren't feeling well and they are trying to throw up or regurgitate, they often will sit there and bob their head for a moment, and then they just bring it up, whatever's in that crop or further down, up really quickly, and they often shake their head to like get everything out of their mouth. But when they do that shaking, they kind of spray vomit everywhere, and they often get it on their head. And so when I see this, I know this bird has been throwing up, and an owner may not even have seen the bird physically throwing up or doing the behaviors of throwing up, or really seen too much in the cage that made them think that the bird was throwing up. But I can tell just looking at this picture, this bird has been throwing up. And so these are the sort of things that happen when you end up feeding them inappropriate food items. So just be mindful during the holidays. We love to share food with each other. Try to share it with your human friends. Try to avoid sharing it so much with your birdie friends. I would recommend going and getting some treats that are meant for birds. I mean, for my birds, when it's a holiday season, I get them bird treats, that are bird specific treats that were made for birds, so that I can feel like I'm giving them something, and it makes me feel like, they're part of my family and they're enjoying the holidays with me, but I know we're doing it safely. Okay, the next thing I wanted to talk about was toys, right? Because usually during the holiday season, we are giving gifts to one another, and we're giving toys to kids. And I like to give toys and gifts to my birds. I don't have any kids. So my pets are my kids, and I absolutely buy tons of toys for them and snacks and stuff for the holidays, and they open their presents, but when we are buying toys for birds, try to buy them bird toys. Try not to buy them all the fun, cute little things that are out there that are holiday toys for people, because looking at all these fun, cute little like Christmassy toys that are out there, none of these are appropriate for birds for different reasons. So we'll start off with these fun little stuffed elves. The problem with some of the like stuffed animal things that are out there can be stringy stuff like this little elf's hair, and things like that can get wrapped around toes. And I have had birds come in with string that they have found from somewhere, wrapped around toes, and cause constriction lesions. I've had birds lose toes. I even had a bird end up losing a leg once because of a fibrous thing that was constricted around its leg. So it may seem like a little innocent thing, but these little stringy things can be problematic. The other thing is, if we have a bigger bird who's good at tearing things apart, a small beak may not be able to break into this and cause any damage, but a bigger beak can. And what's inside of here, it's usually not like papery stuff like some of the more like little stuffy things that are made for pets. A lot of the little stuffed toys, not all of them, but some of the stuffed toys that are made for pets are packed more with like a papery stuff that makes it more floofy, I guess, as opposed to like fibers. It depends on what pet toy you're purchasing. But you know, your typical stuffed animals for kids are going to be filled with just normal cottony fiber stuff, right? And so you could have a bird with a good beak break into this and start to pull that fluffing out. And if they pull it out and they throw it and they don't mess with it, no big deal. But there are some birds who eat some little fibrous things. And we've talked before in previous webinars about like little conures, green cheek conures eating their little fibrous hut things. So, eating just a teeny little fiber over a period of time, one day and the next day, another day, stuff builds up in their GI tract and it's hard for them to excrete it, it seems like, and they can get foreign bodies. Cockatiels also are known for getting foreign bodies, particularly in their crop. And I've had other random species of birds, Plectus, cockatoos, that eat goofy things that you wouldn't think you think they would know better to not eat. But animals do silly things sometimes, and so we just don't want them eating things inappropriately, and we don't want to be the ones who gave them that item. Okay, these cute little rubber bendable things. The problem with something like this is usually there's a wire inside of there that makes it able to bend. And not all toys that are available on the market are the safest thing in the world. And you absolutely do have things that can have lead in them. And so lead is a sort of malleable metal. And if you have a metal that kind of bends there, sometimes you have to be suspicious that there could potentially be lead. And I don't know that there's lead inside of something like this, but there could potentially be in that little bendable wire that's in there. And what if a bird chews on that? And then we end up having a bird be toxic. I have to say, whenever I have a bird that has lead toxicity, that is a pet parrot, like 90% of the time, we have no idea where that lead toxicity came from. No idea. And it's frustrating because then I can't tell an owner, well, you exposed it to this thing, keep it away from there. But it could be little weird things like this that we aren't really thinking like, oh, there's any lead in that. It's just this little rubber toy. But remember that there's something inside of it. And birds are great at demolishing things and destroying things. So not letting them have that stuff is important. And then, just something like this, again, it's cute. It's just some weird little plastic thing. But there are little particulate things on there that could be problematic, stringy stuff that could get wrapped around toes, or even like in this little part of the sleigh here where you have these little openings, toes could get stuck inside of things inappropriately and birds injure themselves. So keep away from human toys for the birds. What we want to do instead is choose holiday bird toys. They make lots of fun little things. You can go on to any pet website, or I know of people locally who make bird toys. I'm sure there's people locally in all different parts of the world that make fun little bird toys during the holiday seasons. I pulled a lot of these pictures from different internet sites, and I cited them all at the end. But you can get these fun little Christmas trees, or just standard non-holiday toys for your birds. I know a few years ago there were some cute little Hanukkah toys. I couldn't find any online this year. I don't know why. Maybe I was just doing poor searching. I'm not sure, but there's fun little things that people make for all different types of holidays. So you can find things out there that are bird safe. But when a bird's destroying this is made out of wood. This is something that a bird is naturally going to be chewing up in the wild appropriately. They're really unlikely to have any sort of problems from something like this. There really shouldn't be anything that's toxic inside of this for them. This thing that this particular toy is on a stainless steel rod, so it's not something that I'm having to worry about things like lead toxicity or anything like that. Now, I will say that even with bird toys, you still have to be somewhat cautious and be mindful that still sometimes birds can get themselves into trouble because Well, animals like to get themselves into trouble. But if you look at this particular side here where we have the little hooks on these different toys, these hooks I would argue are a little more dangerous. And I'm going to show you a photo. Here's a little budgie that actually got its beak stuck on a hook. It was actually this shape of hook, but if we go back, you could see how these are just potentially, they could pinch, you know, but this bird had this particular hook on its in its cage for one of its toys, and it was playing with this portion of the hook, the portion that they really shouldn't be playing with, but again, animals play with whatever the heck they feel like, and it actually got caught on the beak. So when the bird was chewing on it, it got caught on the beak, and underneath the beak where there's that little like fleshy soft spot, it actually punctured through there. So what you can see, this picture doesn't look too graphic because the feathers are covering it up, but there's actually a hole underneath here, and what's on the feathers is blood. So that wire actually poked through that fleshy soft spot that's like underneath the tongue and right underneath the beak at the non-keratinaceous portion there, and had a hole in there. And I've seen that a couple of times with birds with the little attachment pieces of the toys. So definitely something, if you see a little hook like that, maybe you shouldn't use it. Maybe you should change it out. There's plenty of the other appropriate types of hooks that you can purchase or, you know, repurpose from old toys to use again. And then, hold on a second. Just needed a water break. This picture over here is just showing a budgie that ended up having to have a little bandage put on its foot after having a little string get wrapped around its leg. Thankfully, this is one where it just caused a small laceration, and we just needed to apply ointments, cover it up so the bird wouldn't bother it, get it on some pain meds, and, you know, heal just fine. But there are some birds that end up losing toes because of constriction that was caused by something getting wrapped around them. So just be aware, if you're giving your bird foreign toys that they've never given it before, stick with bird toys and just be mindful of what the toy looks like to make sure there isn't anything that it could snag itself on or hurt it in some way. Okay, the next thing is stress. So, you know, during the holiday season, even though people love the holiday season, absolutely people get stressed during the holiday season, right? Because there's just so much going on. And we have to imagine that if we get stressed, we created these holidays for us to have joy and have fun and be, you know, celebrating with family. And when we created, you know, these holidays that are having this particular purpose, and yet we still get stressed by them, you have to imagine that birds probably get stressed by them as well. And there's various things that could happen that could make a bird be stressed. So I put some pictures up here of things to help us think about what could be going on during these holiday seasons that could be stressful. So picture right in the center there, Santa Claus and a couple of kids. What are those kids doing? They're upset, they're crying, they are not happy seeing Santa Claus, but they're just young little kids. And oftentimes people are having family come over that they may not be seeing all the times of the year, and maybe having some young kids coming that maybe the birds haven't been around kids before, or maybe they haven't been around somebody who acts a particular way or laughs at a particular volume, or, you know, maybe even having family members that come over that dress a different way or just look a different way. It could potentially be a little stressful if birds are not used to being around like tiny humans, and tiny humans are screaming or crying or anything like that. It could be stressful for a bird because why is that tiny human acting that way? In the picture up in the upper right hand corner of the family that looks like they're all getting into a little bit of a fight. We love our families, but you know, sometimes when we all get together and we're all cramped in a room, sometimes we fight with each other, right? It is absolutely something that many people talk about during holidays, that, you know, oh, we got to fight with grandma or aunt whoever, what have you. And so, you know, we have to recognize that if people are bickering with one another and a bird is watching this or hearing it, it could be stressful for them because they may not be used to people fighting or bickering or having elevated, you know, voices or things like that. And so yes, we're stressed when we are potentially getting into conflicts with people, but it stresses birds too. And we have to remember that our birds get stressed by the same things that we get stressed by. The picture right below that of the kids having the little band there, you know, during holiday season, again, we're often giving kids gifts and things, right? And so the gifts that we give them, we have to recognize that maybe the birds might not like those gifts so much. And so when kids do get loud noise making things like guitars and drums and all that sort of stuff, if the bird has not ever been around that sort of stuff before, initially when they hear those sort of things that are loud, it could be really stressful for them. So keeping in mind, if you have a bird and you've given your kids, again, a drum set or something like that, and that bird's have never been around a drum set before, recognizing it might be a little stressful. You might need to put that in a different part of the house initially, so the bird can hear it from far away and it's not so alarming and concerning. That sort of stuff. And then I put a picture of, that's actually my puppy, when he was a puppy. Puppies, you know, kittens, other animals. Even though often we encourage people to not to give pets during the holiday season, it still happens. People do give pets to others. And recognize that if a bird has not been around a dog or a cat, that could be really stressful for them too. My puppy there, when I first got him, I had gotten my macaw, who was a rescue, and I got her during a period where I didn't have a dog. I don't know if she was ever around dogs, and then I got this puppy. And when she saw him, she was like, what the heck is that thing? I don't even know what that is. Like, what is that weird little black fuzzy blob that's running around? Can I bite it? You know? So, you know, it was stressful for her versus my other birds. Had like Arroyo, he had been with previous dogs of mine. And so for him, he was like, no, it's a dog, you know, like he didn't worry, he wasn't upset by it, but my macaw was totally stressed. And so I think that's important to mention as well, is that different things can stress birds out differently. So recognize that birds are just like us emotionally, and what stresses one individual out doesn't necessarily stress another individual out. So you have to keep that in mind. My husband plays instruments, and so in the back of our house, we have a drum set and guitars and things like that. And one of my birds seems to love it. Like whenever he goes and plays his instruments, she's back there and she just wants to be right there by all the noise. She like purposely walks into the back of the house to like see what's going on, you know? So some individuals love those sort of things and it's lots of fun, but for other individuals, it's not so great. Now, the problem with stress, of course, is that stress can predispose us to being sick, and same thing with birds. If a bird is stressed out, then its immune system could potentially be suppressed. If we have a suppressed immune system, you could potentially allow something that's sort of lying in wait to pop out and be a problem. And we definitely have talked before about different diseases. Like I know with Bornavirus, you know, Dr. Oros has talked about, you know, stress being one of the precipitating factors. So could potentially home stresses in these environments cause a bird to break with signs of a problem when it was harboring something and it wasn't being so much of a problem previously. So it's certainly something that we have to keep in mind. So talking about these issues brings me sort of to the concluding slide here of, you know, we can absolutely avoid problems and issues during the holidays. One of the things that can be considered is boarding your bird somewhere. So if you have a lot of family coming over and you normally don't have that amount of family visiting, or maybe a family member could potentially be a little stress inducing for a bird. Like maybe you've had a particular family member over in the past that you found your bird wasn't super excited to have that family member over, you know, someone maybe who's a little too loud, or maybe a little bit too trying to mess with the bird when the bird doesn't want to be bothered and the person doesn't understand bird body language. You know, if you know your bird is potentially going to be stressed in these situations, you know, there are good boarding facilities out there. Of course, it may be variable depending upon where somebody is in the world, but I know many great boarding facilities for birds are out there, and it might be something that might be a little bit better and more relaxed for a bird. Now, of course, you have to also keep in mind that sometimes leaving the house can be stressful. So is it more stressful to stay in the home with changes versus is it more stressful to go out and boarding? And that's something that individual owners have to really determine on their own as to whether or not they think their bird is going to be really stressed in either situation, and they're going to have to pick and choose which is best for their bird. And it may be different from one bird in the home to another bird in the home, so that's something people have to keep in mind as well. Now, the other option too, say that you're going somewhere, say that you're not going to be home, you're going out to a family member's house for the holidays. You know, keeping your pets at home with a pet sitter is a really good option, because then they're still staying in their home that they're used to, where there aren't many changes, other than maybe you're not around as much, but maybe that's going to be less stressful for individuals. Say you have a bird that does not like to go boarding and all your family is coming over, but you know your bird might be a little stressed in those situations. If you have a different room or area where the bird can be that's sort of separate and away from a lot of chaotic activities, that might be a good thing to do. It might be good to have like your own private boarding area in your own house where the bird stays and it's away from all the exciting activities. Or, you know, the other thing too is maybe the bird just has that sort of room as a like timeout area, so that, you know, nobody is allowed to go to that area where that bird is. If the bird is visibly getting stressed by people being around that it's not used to, then it can go to a nice quiet zone. The other thing that's really important, and this is hard, is make sure visitors know the rules about interacting with birds. And the reason I say it's hard is because, you know, people often love animals and they want to be able to touch and pet things. And for dogs and cats, most dogs and cats are fine with being pet. And people who don't know birds think that birds should be like a dog or a cat. And so they think that they can pet a bird, and a bird may not be too interested in that. Now, you may have a bird who is really interested in being pet by different people and they don't care, and it's actually a highlight of their day if there's somebody new coming that interacts with them. Well, that's fine for that individual, but it may not be so for another individual. Well, this is my macaw in this photo here, and she loves other people coming around, and she gets excited when she gets to meet new people, and she's happy to have people pet her head. Versus Arroyo, he likes other people, but he does not want to be pet. And so I have to let people know, if you want to pet somebody, you pet the macaw, you don't pet Arroyo. Arroyo will interact with you. He wants to be with you. He likes to do his little tricks and things and get treats from you, and he likes to socialize with you, but he doesn't want to be pet. And people have to be made aware of those things. Otherwise, somebody gets bit, and then somebody gets upset, and then somebody, you know, in your family ends up saying, oh my gosh, you know, you have these crazy birds causing more drama. So just make sure that people are aware. If you have a bird, if you know that you have a bird that does not like to be pet or interacted with, people need to know those sort of things and be aware of it. Other thing I think is important is put the birds to bed at their regular times. If you have sort of a set regimen with your bird, try to stick to whatever that regimen is as best as possible to reduce the amount of stress that these birds can feel. Whether that's, you know, regular bedtimes or feeding times or out of the cage play times, try to keep your regimen to what would be normal, if you can, safely, of course, because again, we got to go back to the whole cooking and things. Like if you're at home where you normally would be home and now you're cooking and you want your bird out, you know, well, maybe the bird needs to stay in its cage, that sort of thing. So which I say is the next thing, keep birds in cages while cooking, because we don't want birds flying into the kitchen and having any of those problems like I showed of the legs in the boiling pot of water, flying into ovens, singeing their tail on flames, that sort of stuff. Use only safe items when cooking around birds. I don't even have any Teflon in my house. It's just not something I would ever purchase. I've got too many birds. I need to be safe. And that's something that I would encourage bird owners to be aware of as well. But if you have Teflon things and you're like, I'm not getting rid of these, I'm going to use them, well, then maybe the bird goes boarding for that day while you're doing all the cooking, so that you're being as safe as possible. Never use the self-cleaning function of the oven when a bird is in the house. Again, if you want to use that, get the bird out of the house, get it somewhere where it can board, get it somewhere where it is going to be safe, a safe airspace that you're not going to have any problems. And then buy bird specific or bird safe toys, remove anything that's damaged or appears unsafe. You know, you have to be the one who is judging whether or not something is safe with your bird, because you really should know your bird better than anybody else. And so if you know that your bird likes to, you know, chew things up, fibrous things up, and make little you know, stringy pieces of things that could potentially get wrapped around toes, well, maybe they shouldn't have that. Or if they are, that you're trimming things down so that they're not causing any problems. And then one other thing I wanted to talk about that I realized I forgot to put on here was I did kind of mention, like, when people get new pets and everything and bringing them into the household, really any time of year, but can, you know, happen during the holiday seasons, is if you do have a dog or a cat or something that's being brought into the home that could potentially be a predator to a bird, or say you have family coming over and a family member brings their dog with them, you have to make sure that that animal is either safely away from the bird is able to be safely secured from the animal, or that animal is trained appropriately to not cause any problems for the birds. And especially if it's something where your family member is bringing a pet with them, it may honestly be just safer and better to have those birds kept in your birds kept in a different part of the house, or that pet that's coming kept in a different part of the house. Because if they're not going to routinely be around each other, then do we really need to integrate them with each other? Not necessarily, you know. And I have had some sad stories during the holidays when family members have brought a pet over that was never around the birds before, doesn't know what a bird is, isn't, you know, knowing that it's not supposed to chase birds, because hey, when it's outside, it gets to chase the birds outside and they fly away and everything's fine. So, you know, you just don't want to have one of those situations happen. I have a lot of image references that I put up here because I did, usually most of my PowerPoints, I take pictures like for my own stuff, but this time around I used a lot of pictures from the internet, so I just need to make sure that I cite those appropriately. And then also I did take some pictures, again, like I said, from some of my colleagues, so thank you to them. And now lastly, in the last little bit of time that we have here, looks like we got a few more minutes left. Any questions that anybody has that I could answer?
Okay, well, we do have questions for you. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. That was some very valuable information as we head into guests infiltrating houses and food feasts going on. It's now also food temperature, right? Birds can, just like us, burn their tongues, because I just did that in my coffee earlier today, and it was a reminder to me that, yeah.
Yep, let things cool off a little bit. You know, and we know it mostly for like crop burns in birds, and we know it mostly for baby birds, because baby birds are the ones who are most commonly getting crop burns, but absolutely an adult can have it happen too. If you give them something that's too hot, you take it right out of the oven, and here, you know,
here's some sweet potato mash, right? It's
yeah, yeah, and they're so excited they just, you know, gulp it down, not even like recognizing it's hot, and then it gets in that crop and it sits in that crop, and then it can cause a lot of localized irritation, and they may not get some burn that's too horrible to where it like actually opens up the skin, because that's when it's a really bad burn, but they could get just enough irritation to where then now it sets up an environment for a secondary bacterial or yeast infection to happen, and then there you go.
Wow. Okay, so room temperature for these.
Yeah.
All right. So we do have a question for you about ceramic coated pans. Are they safe for parrots? And yeah, they said that the pure ceramic pans are safe, but there's no information about ceramic coated pans. So do you know anything about that?
Okay, so I do know that the ceramic is okay, but as far as the ceramic coated ones, I don't know what then the base is underneath it. If it's just like a metal pan and it's just ceramic coating, that should be just fine. But I would want to know I would want to know what the rest of the pan was made out of, like, just to be really safe.
Okay, and another kind of similar vein question. Are you aware of any brand of PTFE, et cetera, free, so PTFE free waffle iron or toaster oven, either plain or uncoated stainless steel or acceptable ceramic coating? They recently found a terrific electric skillet by Green Pan that has their ceramic nonstick coating, which is Thermalon Volt, but they've been looking for a waffle iron for many years. So what about a waffle iron? Do you know any brands that might be?
I do not know of any brands. I am really sorry. That is something I am not sure of, if there are any ones that are safe out there that aren't coated with Teflon.
Okay.
Sorry.
So maybe in the meantime, you should just treat any as having it. So with ventilation, it's all that err on the side of caution, right?
Yeah.
Oh, someone says when in doubt, look for the Prop 65 California warning. I guess that's if you're in California.
Yes.
So, let's see. So are oven cleaners, are the cleaners for ovens safe? So
Thinking
like a spray cleaner here.
the spray cleaners, I'd have to see particularly which ones are being used. I don't know of the spray cleaners actually being any sort of problem. Generally speaking, we do usually tell people try not to use any sort of sprays around birds, because this aerosolization of anything we sometimes just worry a little bit about. And if we don't know, again, we more err on the side of caution that something could potentially be toxic. But I have not ever heard of anybody having a problem with the spray cleaners and like manually cleaning things. It's really the function in the oven itself, because it does, when you turn that thing on, it heats it up a lot. And again, the problem with the Teflon is it has to get to a high enough temperature for the toxin to be able to be emitted. So again, if you're boiling water, you're typically not going to have a problem, because usually you're not getting to a hot enough level in a pot of boiling water. So
yeah, that's true. And same with irons, because if you're going out to a fancy holiday thing, you're ironing your clothes, that also the hot iron can also have coating on that, right?
yes. Yep.
Okay, someone wants to know, are chicken bones okay? Herdo is healthy occasionally. Are raw pumpkin seeds okay? Also, other squashes. So are chicken bones okay? Raw pumpkin seeds, and some of the squashes.
So the chicken bones you do have to be a little cautious of. It depends on how well things have been cooked, because when we talk about, like any sort of raw meat sort of thing, there's always the concern about bacterial contamination, even with people, right? Like that's why you have to cook meat to a particular level, because you're trying to make it so that there is not any bacteria that could potentially cause you to be sick. So that's number one. But if things have been cooked appropriately, then they're not as problematic as they are for like dogs, because people always say don't give them to dogs because chicken bones tend to splinter more, and they could be a lot more irritating to the mucosa of the gastrointestinal tract if a dog eats it, and you could have problems. But with birds, because they tend to not really like necessarily eat so much of the bone, they usually do more like scraping of the marrow is what happens, it seems like, with birds when they get chicken bones. We're not so worried about any sort of splintering or anything like that happening. I've personally never seen any problems from a bird eating a chicken bone and getting sort of any splinters or anything like that, the way that we worry about it with dogs. But what we do need to keep in mind is that if they are kind of scraping the inside of the marrow and getting that really high fat content in that marrow, that's exactly what it is. It's really high fat. So I would not make a habit out of it, but if they did it like, every once in a while, it's unlikely to be a problem. It just has to be cooked, and just don't make a habit out of it. Now, as far as the pumpkin seeds, that's totally fine. Those are safe. Squashes are safe for them. That you don't have to worry about.
And that's raw pumpkin seeds. Right? You don't have to. So you can either bake them or offer them raw. Is that?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. And then Brenda pointed out that the Prop California warning is on most things now, because they don't want the two labels specifically for California. So. There you go. Look for Prop.
There we go.
So also, does the country of origin of the for toys cause concern? Are there places that to avoid? So
yeah,
some pieces that might be lead or not, like.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that that is a good question. And there is the concern about the higher potential for lead to be in toys that come from China. You know, so it is something to be aware of. However, I would still say, like I mentioned, when I have a lead toxicity parrot come into the office, 90% of the time we have no idea where it came from. And so it's really frustrating because they're getting it from somewhere, but where was it? You know, so any sort of bendable wire things, you just have to be a little cautious of. You want to stick more with, you know, that this product is stainless steel, when it's any sort of like, you know, rod or something like that on these bird toys that they could potentially be interacting with. And then the other portions being, you know, wood, paper based, that sort of stuff, we know that that's going to be safer for them. So that's, I mean, yes, I would say there is a little bit of caution that we have to take with where the origin of the toy may be from, but more caution of, I need to know, I want to look specifically at what the product is. You know, what do I know about it? How well can I say that, yes, this is just wood or just paper and it's safe and it's fine, versus there could potentially be something in here that could be a problem. So.
Okay. Wow. Well, we just blew through the hour. That was quick. Let's see. So yeah, okay. So I got to announce today's giveaway winner. And hopefully early holiday present for your bird. It's going to Jerry Harkey. Congratulations, Jerry. You and going to get the Lafeber foraging pack, as well as another Lafeber product of your bird's choice. Hopefully that makes your weekend. Wow, we are heading straight into, I cannot believe we're already like halfway through, or mid-November. It's,
yeah, I know.
yeah, right. So just want to get, so next Friday, we're going to be on with Dr. Tom Tully with Ask the Vet. And then, wow. And then we're in like now, then we're back in December with we have our big holiday giveaway and stuff coming up. So keep an eye out for that one. And then, wow, those are some really good tips that we should all keep in mind. I think that if you're hosting a big party and you have guests coming over, maybe have them sign a guest contract that they're aware that which birds like to be petted, which ones might be nippy, and so they're fully aware. And there goes your liability. And
yeah, right. Good idea.
I'll never forget. Years ago, my sister-in-law, God bless her, she opened up my cockatiel's cage, and right when my mom was walking in with a casserole dish, and sure enough, my cockatiel spooked and ran across the top of the casserole, like doing the,
oh my gosh,
you know, walking on hot coals, and then took off flying. Fortunately, my cockatiel was fine, and my mom was horrified because there's a bird in the, anyways, lessons learned, like, yeah.
Right, exactly.
And it happened before I could even say, don't open the cage. It was like, yeah, so that's how quickly that went. So, all right. On that note, once again, thanks, Dr. Lamb. Appreciate you joining us again, and can't wait for another episode of the Vet Insider. Do we have our topic for you already picked out?
Yes. Yep. The next one is going to be respiratory problems. Respiratory problems.
Wow. Okay.
Yep.
There we go. That's going to be like piggybacked on, you know, when people are firing up their indoor fireplaces, or I don't know, right?
Yep.
Okay. Well, we'll get you some tips and things to be aware of when we start doing with the winter care here. Respiratory. There we go. So we'll see you back with that. Everyone have a great weekend. Thanks again, Dr. Lamb. And Royal, I didn't even see Royal. Oh, there's a
lazy day today, I guess.
Royal's taking the day off. So
yep.
All right. All right, guys, have a great weeks ahead here. Okay. All the best to your flock, and everyone stay safe. Until next time. Bye.
Bye.
There we go. Okay. Bye, everyone.